Good afternoon, and welcome to AIADA's AutoTalk. I'm your host, Rachel Soleimani. Before I introduce today's presenters, a few quick reminders as always. Everyone that is registered for today's program will receive a copy by the end of this week. And if you have any questions, feel free to enter them into the lower right side of your interface under the Q&A bar. Today, we welcome back our dear friends, Tom Contos, Chief Economist at Car Global, Bob Grill, Senior Partner Development Manager at Carfax, and automotive consultant Mike Rossman. These guys really know their stuff when it comes to the used car market, so I'm going to let them do all the talking. Tom, I'll let you start. Take it away.
Rachel, always enjoy the opportunity to speak with the audience that is part of AIADA, because I'm kind of at 30,000 feet as an economist chief economist for Car Global, parent company of ADESA Auctions and AFC Finance. And so I get a sort of a big picture of what's going on in the market, but, dealers every day are where the rubber meets the road. So it's always good to sort of share my information and then hopefully get feedback that's helpful to, clarify our views on where things are going. But looking forward to covering this material. I'll jump right in. I call this the shapes of things to come, because economists are trying not to take a backseat to meteorologists this year. Meteorologists had to go to the Greek alphabet to name all the storms that have been happening in 2020. So economists said, well, we got to come up with something too. So apparently our deal is, is this a V-shaped recovery? Is it a Nike swoosh? Is it a square root sign? Is it a K-shaped recovery? So that's how we're sort of keeping up with the meteorologists and kind of describing the crazy situation that we're having here in 2020. So with that said, let's go into some of the numbers. Hopefully everybody can see these, but what I have is a couple graphs. One on the unemployment claims, which continue to be very, very high. This is maybe not the latest week's data, but we're still in the 800,000 range on the weekly claims for unemployment insurance. And so that's a lot of people still sort of either on an ongoing basis or kind of an initial basis that are adding to the rosters of people getting unemployment insurance. So that's high. We have had reductions in jobs. We had the reduction in jobs, but we've come back a bit, and that's what you see on the right side. But we're still at about 10 million jobs plus that haven't been replaced since before the pandemic. So, it's not the typical kind of jobs growth that makes us happy as economists that the economy's booming and we're getting growth and more people that are joining the labor force are finding jobs. This is an economy where we're just getting jobs growth because we took away the jobs during furloughs and other events that caused people to stop working and then getting back to work. So it's not really job additions necessarily, but job kind of resumption. So, but it is good to see people going back to getting paychecks because that gives them an ability to then make big ticket purchases like on new and used vehicles. So that's good to see. But we still got quite a ways to go. This little graph here on the government stimulus, kind of look at those gray bars on this graph, and you can see normally the what we call transfer payments from the government to private citizens that enable private citizens to add to their income, whether it's in the form of Social Security or unemployment claims or something new like a government stimulus package, which you see in the gray bar in April, May, June, kind of way bigger than the normal level of government transfer payments, which were in the 500 billion range. And now, the stimulus money in April was in the trillions, almost $4 trillion. So that's what enabled the blue bars on this graph, which are total personal income, to stay not only steady, but even climb higher than they were pre-pandemic. So the government sustained the level of income that people have, and that enables those folks to still make kind of the same sorts of purchases that they were making before. Whereas in a normal recession, we'd have an adjustment period and personal income would start to drop. And so this is an unusual situation. And sort of the big question these days, of course, out of Washington, besides who's going to win the election, is when are we going to have a stimulus package? My view is that with the incumbent, we would probably see a stimulus package pass sooner, especially if the Senate remains a Republican majority. In the case of a Biden victory, then we would probably see a stimulus package that might include other things, other programs. And again, especially if there's a Democratic majority in the Senate, that would probably enable a more ambitious sort of plan that would not only include government stimulus, but other things. And that would, of course, happen in the new year. So, but the view I have is, stimulus money is necessary to sort of keep things going. And so whether we get it a little sooner in maybe a smaller volume or later as part of a bigger package, then I think either way, we need that to kind of keep things going. Especially in light of concerns about the rise in cases and other things that may slow things down again. So with that said, what about the consumer? The consumer has saved a lot of money because a lot of these transfer payments, consumers can't spend all of what they, in total. Now, when you look at individuals, it's hard to see this, but when you sort of roll this up at a national level and you look at the total level of personal income in the country, and you look at how what the opportunities there have been to spend money, people haven't spent all they got from not only their own continued income if they were still employed, but from these transfer payments I described earlier. So savings rates are actually up. People are actually saving more, and they're also drawing down on their debts, so they're paying off some of their credit card balances, and they're trying to do some of those kinds of things. Not to say, though, that consumers aren't still getting in hock in buying homes and cars and doing other things with money that they might have gotten from the government, but then went over and above that, so that they required a little bit of financing to be able to make, the purchase happen. So with that being the case, credit levels are still high, but as a percentage of the income growth that I just described, credit levels are actually down from what they were pre-pandemic. So that's the right-hand graph on this page. So my point here is that consumers still have a little bit of a headroom, if you will, to continue to spend money, and that would tide us over as we figure out what's going to come next from the stimulus funds that I described a minute ago. So that's good to see, but that won't last forever. This situation with consumers, eventually, consumers are going to need additional influx of support to make things, still as strong as they've been in the economy. So we'll have to wait and see how that goes. So on the next slide, I've got fuel prices. Sometimes lost in all of the discussions that are happening these days about the economy is, hey, it's been a good time as far as fuel prices go. They've been down, and they were already down for many years, but had been starting to climb, and now they've come back down again. So to the extent people are buying bigger vehicles, they don't really feel guilty about doing that because there's plenty of savings from the fuel bill that enables them to feel comfortable making a purchase of maybe a little less fuel efficient vehicle, a bigger vehicle. Though I'm always quick to add that, the pickup trucks and SUVs of today get a lot better fuel mileage than the ones in the past. So it's not quite as bad a decision in terms of fuel economy to go with a bigger vehicle. And if your lifestyle kind of warrants it, it's not a bad thing to do. And we've seen that big time. The pickup truck has probably been the success story, I like to say, of this pandemic. They were in short supply on the new vehicle side, which we'll get to here in a minute, and they've been in high demand. So, used car prices for pickups are strong, and sales of pickups are strong, and things like that. So, fuel prices have been sort of a good tailwind to allow that to happen. We're driving less. That should come as no surprise. But looking at Department of Transportation data, we're driving about 15% less in 2020 than we did in 2019. And that's a big sort of macroeconomic factor to consider when you start thinking about cycling out and replacement cycles for new and used vehicles. So I think this is kind of extending the life of the vehicle park, if you will, on the roads right now, the vehicles in operation in the U.S., which are in the 300 million range. So when you think about all those cars, driving less means that the replacement demand will probably be down. So it's something to consider. Hasn't really happened so far because, like I was saying, new vehicle sales and used vehicle sales have, or at least implying, I've been saying that they've been brisk for the last few months despite the pandemic. But you got to wonder how long that's going to last when people are driving less. Now, you can see that those bars were at their deepest decline in April, and they've come back a bit in the rest of the summer, but still down quite a bit on a year-over-year basis. So keep an eye on that. I'm keeping an eye on that with regard to what the demand for vehicles is going to be, especially on the new car side. So let's look at new car sales year-to-date through September. I've got a bunch of numbers on this page, but I've tried to parse it out in little chunks. So if you look at the top table on the left-hand side, that's total new vehicle sales year-to-date through September. So we got to about 10.5 versus 12.8 the year before. So we're down about 2.4 million year-to-date in new vehicle sales. Probably a lot less of a decline than we thought we'd have, 18.4%. And then if you back out the fleet vehicles, which are in that middle table, that's where the steepest declines were, not surprisingly. And if you go to the table to the right there, you can see most of the fleet sales declines, which total about 1 million units, came out of the rental fleets. So there was about 800,000 less rental units sold year-to-date through September. That number may end up by the end of the year at about 1 million down from 2019. So that's 1 million fewer rental cars that went into service in 2020 that won't come back as one-year-old off rental vehicles in 2021. So that's going to be sort of a tailwind to wholesale values for late model used cars in 2021, the absence of those rental cars. So that's why I bring that to your attention. And then the bottom table on the left-hand side just shows what retail sales have done. They're only down 13% year-to-date once you back out the fleet sales, or 1.4 million units. So that's pretty good news, really, for how strong the new car market has been despite the pandemic. Inventories remain lean. This is some government data from the Fed on, manufacturer to dealer floor plans outstanding. So this is the dollar amount of, the captive finance lending to dealerships for floor plan financing. And that's down considerably, as you can see. So implying to me that inventories are lean. Still, even as production has ramped up on the new car side, there's still a shortage, really, of new car availability. And that is one of the things that's really supporting the used car market big time right now in terms of pricing and demand. So How have used car sales gone this year? The NADA puts out some good data. Used car sales are always hard to track really to the nth degree, but this page does show that used car sales dropped considerably, not surprisingly, in March and April when things were shut down. But as things started opening back up again, retail sales of used cars started going up, even on a year-over-year basis. So that's good to see. Year to date, of course, they're not up, but they're making their way back. So by year end, maybe we're about flat with 2019, or just down a bit in the low single digits. So, and then certified sales have been one of the success stories of the industry too. So we may have some more to say about that later. So let me keep moving here, because I know I'm eating into other guys' time, and there's some great speakers here, and I want to give them a chance to shine here. But I'm keeping up with used car sales at auction. On the left-hand graph here, we started to see a Nike swoosh there. That kind of flatlined, though, and it's even down. We thought we'd see a lot more repo volume. We thought we'd see a lot more off-lease volume that maybe didn't hit like it normally would, because people got lease extensions. But people are buying their cars at the end of the lease a lot because of the strong wholesale market. They figure they're in equity right now, so they're going ahead and buying their car. And maybe they drove it a little bit less during this time. So they've actually got a lower mileage car that they can buy at a pretty attractive residual value. So that is probably denying auctions and other channels of off-lease volumes that we would have otherwise seen. Plus, dealers are buying the cars at first opportunity, so the take rate keeps those cars from really getting downstream into the auction lane, into the auctions, and that's probably keeping the values strong again. So the values have been strong. I've been saying that repeatedly in this call. If you look at the left graph here, you can see prices for, and I've got pickup trucks, vans, SUVs, and cars there. And you can see things kind of peaked earlier in the summer. They've softened, but they're still strong on a year-over-year basis, still positive. You can see that on the right-hand side, too, where I've got all the weeks lined up there. And you can see when the turning point came. The turning point came around mid-May, and then we got to break even, and we've been up on a year-over-year basis pretty much every week across every segment. And of course, pickup trucks, as you can see, have been the strongest performer, as I've mentioned earlier. On this slide, we've got the by model year. So younger cars and older cars are performing well, I guess is my point here. Repos, I don't show the volume axis here with labels, but these are sales at ADESA auctions from accounts that have repos only. And so I'm looking at the volumes of repos. We had kind of an uptick at the early stages of COVID in repo volumes, but that started going down, and we're just expecting more repo volumes. It's just not clear when that'll happen. A lot of lenders are reluctant to repossess a car right now, and so understandably so. They're doing all they can to keep the consumer in the vehicle, and that's probably a good thing, but it's keeping some of the cars that probably will end up being repossessed over time from hitting the market sooner rather than later. And so I think with that, in the interest of time, I'm going to turn it over to Bob. All right, Bob. Thank you.
We appreciate you presenting that to us. Just real quickly, I'm Bob Grill with Carfax. I'm the Senior Partner Development Manager. Mike and myself have been happy to do these. We do them every year with the team, and we're both honored and pleased to be able to do it with you. Mike, you want to say a quick hello before we get started?
Just a good day to everyone out there. We're glad to be with you again, and hopefully we'll shed some light on a few things that might help you in your day-to-day operations.
Yeah, there was a lot of information, Tom, like you said, it's from the 30,000 foot level. So Mike and I are going to simplify things a little bit. right? And the overall theme of our presentation today is taking a look at what you were told when you got in the business. The very first thing you were taught in the used car business, right, was there's no such thing as a used car factory. You know, that was always the running gag, and that's why people like used cars, because there's no two that are alike, and that's still true today. But the old adage that no such thing as a used car factory, well, that's just simply not true anymore. But it's simpler than it is complicated. As a matter of fact, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3, and we're going to break those down for you. The first place we're going to stop is trades, right? It's as easy as 1, 2, 3. Trade-ins would be number 1. The service department would be number 2, being able to get vehicles out of your service department. We're going to touch on that today. And then your lease returns, how to maximize those lease returns, and what should you do with them, right? Just keeping them is not enough. So we're going to share those 3 things with you. And the first thing we're going to do is look at trades, right? So we're going to do a little bit of a baseline for you. The reason we want to do this is because in today's situation, dealers are telling us more than ever that they're having to take a look at keeping vehicles they didn't used to keep. You know, maybe they're a Highline store and they've been trading for pickup trucks and they don't usually keep those. Maybe they trade for convertibles, so they don't usually keep those. But today, they're having to take a look even deeper than ever before, with inventory being as hard as it is to obtain and the turn time needing to be shortened. They're just taking a second and third look. So let's just revisit what are the best inventory pieces. And if you're looking at trade-ins at 50s, you need to think about keeping them. The first one is that when it hits that sweet spot of selling for half of what it did when it was brand new, that's its optimal turn. That's when it'll turn the quickest for the most amount of money. The thing about that is it doesn't really matter if it's an import or domestic or a Highline. If it sold 50,000 brand new, when it's able to sell for that 25,000 on a used lot, that's when it's maximum, right? They should have an average of 12,000 miles a year or less. That's been adjusted in some markets to be around that 15,000 mile, but 12 is still the benchmark standard. And typically they're going to be 4 to 6 years old. Why 4 to 6 years old? Because that's about what it takes to be able to retail at 50%. We know most of the lease returns have a 50% residual, but of course you would pay a little bit for that car and recon and so forth, so it wouldn't actually sell for 50%, and we'll build on that in just a minute. The colors are always the colors. These have always been the best sellers, the blacks, the whites, the silver, and the grays. You know, the reds, the greens, the blues, the yellows, browns, those come in style and leave in style. But black, white, silver, and gray are the steadies. And why are we bringing this up? Again, we're bringing it up because you simply can't find these cars at auction, right? These 4 to 6 year old, right color, right mile cars, they're not at any auction in America. You could go with an empty hauler and a blank check, and you're just not going to come home with any. So you have to trade for these. So again, even if it's a trade in your store doesn't typically keep, if they fall into these parameters as to what sells the quickest for the most money, you need to take a second, third, and even a fourth look at keeping those vehicles. Mike, you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think it's important when you're looking at trade-ins to review a few things, and that's reviewing all your appraisals on a daily basis just to make sure you haven't missed anything. It may be different today for some of the dealers to be looking at off-brands, not the brand that they sell, but off-brands, and trying to figure out what that half price is. But you just need to dig a little deeper and make sure you're doing that. With that, make sure that we're looking and reviewing all your appraisals on a daily basis just to make sure we haven't missed any. The other thing I would tell you is you need to benchmark your appraisals for your look to book and be sure that you're trading for your fair share. We know from information that 70% of all of our new car customers have a trade-in. So what's your win ratio? Is it 20%, 30%, 40% of those customers that are trying to trade a car in on a new car, your new car customers? So important for you to set a benchmark for your appraisal team and look at that virtually every day just to make sure that we're winning the right number of trades. I think that's really important. And if you don't know what your trade ratio is, you should try to find out pretty quick, and it's not that hard to do. You've got all that information off of your DMS these days. So pretty important to do.
And here's a little buildup on that, right? If you actually look at the performance of your trade-ins versus those purchase cars, when we say purchase cars, we're not talking internally. We're talking you go to some outside auction source or some outside fleet source that's not necessarily in your market, and there's a real difference in the way those cars perform. We know that trade-ins turn 10 days faster for an average of $1,000 more profit. And if you look at, according to NADA study, right, the NADA data for 2019, what actually sold that year, 37% of what actually sold were purchase units, where 63% of what actually got delivered were trade-ins, right? The ironic part is if you look at what was actually in stock, it's just the opposite. It's been absolutely flipped. We're carrying about 40% trade-ins and 60% purchases. And what's that net result? Well, that net result is that auction vehicles, the external auction vehicles, they're accounting for about 80% of that aging loss, wholesale loss, especially because today it's more difficult than ever to try and get those shipped. There's days added to the shipping time and downtime, and dealers are finding more and more that they need to be quick on their turn time. They need to try and reduce that turn time to as short as possible because the market fluctuates quite a bit. And I know you had a couple things to add on this one too, right, Mike?
Well, absolutely. When we're looking at trade-ins, it's imperative that we're looking deeper and trying to save more of the trades as we go into this situation. So by that, I mean, on all of the trades that we take, let's see if we can't keep more of those vehicles. Is there a way for us to recondition those cars and make a retail unit out of them rather than wholesaling those cars off? And these baby cars that, have 100, 110, 120,000 miles that historically you haven't kept, but today they're still a good value on your used car lot, and your return is great on those vehicles. And on the purchase cars, you've got to be cognizant of trying to buy the right vehicles, and that is a tough job to do. And as you can see, that they account for a lot of your wholesale loss because we do have to pay a premium for those. So there's some other things that we can do that we're going to discuss here in a minute to maybe drive down the number of cars you're purchasing from outside sources and bring more of those purchases closer to home.
Absolutely. When you take a look at it, that service department, right? Our number 2 element, that service department. That service department and sales department can be one of the best partnerships in the business. We know that's not the case a lot of times, right? We've heard stories and we speak to a lot of dealers, and they're telling us that they've done some exceptional adjustments trying to be more in sync with the service and sales department and do a better partnership between the sales and service department. And really it benefits both service and sales. And here's one of those examples. When a customer is a regular service customer, you sold them that car when it was brand new, and they come back to your dealership and get all the service and maintenance done at that dealership. When they've kept loyal to your dealership after buying that car brand new, they're literally an 86% return rate to purchase their next vehicle from you, where it falls off to 9% if they've never visited your service department. So it's real imperative that you manage both your sales and service in harmony and drive those customers after they purchase new cars back to that service department. And I know this was a specialty of yours, Mike. You put some real routines in place at dealerships. What do you got to add to this one?
Well, and I know a lot of the dealers out there are doing this today, but think about it. You have, 50, 100, 150 cars a day maybe coming through your service department. It's very easy to run out of your DMS all the appointments that you have, and you know what those cars coming in are. You know what the model year, the miles, and if you've serviced that vehicle consistently at your dealership, and target that prime used car inventory you're looking for. Target that as these customers are coming in. You may even consider, and we've done this in a lot of dealerships over the years, is we've assigned salespeople of the service drive to work with those customers, tell them that we're interested in that car, would they be interested in trading? And you'd be surprised at how many cars you might be able to peel out of the service department. The thing that we ran into initially was figuring out how to pay the salespeople for that. You're paying, in a lot of cases, you have buyers that you're paying a fee to go out and buy cars at auction. So why wouldn't you do the same for your salespeople working the service drive? So I think it's really important for you to consider that. The other thing is when you have those particular customers that are going to have a fairly large service bill, they may consider the money better going toward purchasing a different vehicle rather than putting the money into that particular car. So you could offer to pay off that ticket for them if they do end up purchasing a car from you. Obviously, you'd have to pay that anyway to recondition that car if you were to trade for it. So it's really a nice feature in the customer's mind where it works for you as well. So if you pay attention to that service department, you can drive a good amount of business there. A couple other things is, you should try to stage, if it's at all possible, with your dealership arrangement, you should stage a CPO and possibly new car units very close to that service drive so customers get an opportunity to look at inventory maybe they haven't looked at. If they've got a 4, 5, 6-year-old car, you might entice them to trade for something that's a little newer by displaying those cars close to where they're at. I think the more time you can spend with your service department, the more success you'll have with this. And we know that those cars that are serviced at your store have a nice story to tell when you get ready to retail them, and they end up being worth, as that slide showed earlier, about $1,000 more than the cars that you go out and purchase.
You know what? It's not only great for sales, Mike, but when you think of the inventory, which is the main purpose today, that inventory is as good as it gets. That comes out of your service department. You put in some factors like what sells well new, sells well used, right? You look at all those things. You're creating your own homegrown inventory. And this is part of that factory we talked about, right? These vehicles, you sold them brand new. What is homegrown? You sold them brand new. You did all the service and maintenance on them. It got traded back in. You did all the reconditioning at your dealership, and now it's for sale as a used car at your same dealership. That is the fastest selling, most profitable inventory there is. Every dealer knows what we're talking about, whether you call them homegrown or not. These are the cars that drive you crazy because your salesmen are out in the back showing the car before it even got through the service department, or they're even in your service department showing the cars. These usually don't make it through a weekend. Every salesman's got a customer on these. And these are the kinds of inventory you want. If you look at it this way, with every 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 of these you create, you don't have to replace your inventory with outside purchases. So again, the whole adage of today was the used car factory. Here's a prime example of not only are you driving sales by keeping those customers loyal, but their trade-in then becomes your very best inventory possible, right? So with every 1 or 2 or 3 of these you create, it's 1, 2, 3, or 4 you can take off of that high-risk pile on those outside purchases. These cars don't age. They bring all the money, and you have to be able to share that story with the consumer. So the next element we're going to look at is the CPO units, right? We said number 3 was lease returns. Well, lease returns absolutely make the perfect CPO unit. And what do we mean by that? Well, the ideal CPO is actually 2 to 4 years old, not 1-year-old, right? The most effective CPO units are those 2 to 4-year-old vehicles. And as a matter of fact, in the last 180 days, 80% of what's sold in the CPO market has been those 2 to 4-year-old vehicles with 24 to 60,000 miles on it. Because the 1-year-old CPO units push up too close to new car pricing, especially if there's some incentives out there on the new car pricing. So these lease returns, which are typically that 3-year-old, maybe a short term was 24-year-old, or maybe a longer term was 42 months old, they fall perfect into that CPO inventory, right? Because again, the 1-year-old falls too close to new car pricing and the incentives push it up. And then the older inventory just simply falls out of the CPO capability and just simply doesn't draw that much traffic. So again, that 2 to 4-year-old inventory is the perfect CPO inventory, and those lease returns become that perfect inventory. Mike, I know you have a passion for CPO. Do you want to add a little commentary to this one?
Well, the CPOs are every car that you have that you can CPO, I think that you should. It offers such value to the customer. And that's really what they're looking for today. The warranties, you know, in many cases are up to 100,000 miles on CPO units. So it's for the customer, that's a little security blanket for them to have. And, you know, quite frankly, a lot of the styles are similar to what they are new today. So it gives the customer a look of having a new vehicle in a car that gives them as good, in some cases, even a little better warranty than they have on the new vehicle. So CPOs have become a large part of the retail business today and will continue to be so. You know, the other thing that you have to take a hard look at, as Tom brought up earlier, you know, new cars are in short supply today, and they're going to be going forward, which means in the future, used cars are going to be in a short supply as well going forward. So it's going to be imperative that we do a few of these things consistently and not just haphazardly. It's going to be the new way of life here for the next year or year and a half that we've got to really get out there and fight tooth and nail for every used car we can find to supplement our used car department in our business.
And we wanted to take one last look at what CPO can do for you with those lease returns again, and that is it draws in the ideal inventory. By that we mean a new car customer, typical trade is 1 to 3 years old because they're a new car customer. They like that new model every 2 to 3 years, so they trade in the one they had. And a trade-in on your used inventory typically is going to be older than the used car inventory they're buying. So today there's a little bit of an anomaly in that some people are downsizing and get rid of some inventory, right? But typically your used car trade is going to be older. So what's the sweet spot? There it is again. That CPO trade, that CPO attracts the 4 to 6 year old vehicle, which is again the ideal sweet spot for used cars, right? So take your lease returns, turn them into CPO units, let them draw you the best kind of trade-ins possible, which are those 4 to 6 year old trade-ins. If you look at your lot today and all you see out there in your used car lot is the 1 year old inventory or real old inventory, that's because you're not robust enough in having those attractive 2 to 4 year old CPO units bringing you the right kind of trade-in. Because again, those lease returns are a powerful tool. You need to look at them. Dealers traditionally haven't kept them because they felt like they could buy cheaper inventory outside sources. But with today, those sources have dried up. And quite honestly, your lease returns are a higher value target. One owner vehicle, usually it's your best customer, right? Again, what sells well new sells well used. It's got the well maintained. It's been all the service history on them. Their miles have been kept under 12,000 miles. And quite honestly, the public perception of a lease return is that it's kept in great condition because there's always been that horror story about returning a lease return with high miles on it or not in great condition, and people just absolutely taking it. So again, keep those lease returns, turn them into CPO units, let the CPO units draw you the ideal inventory. So with that, I'm going to finish up my part and say thank you. Mike, I know you'd like to say thank you and goodbye, and then we'll turn it back over to Rachel.
Yes, thank you all. And, you know, nobody said it's going to be easy, so it's a lot of hard work out there. But just get your plan together, work it hard, and you can be successful in this used car market today. Thanks for your time, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Tom, Bob, Mike, thanks for joining us today. We really love having you on, and it's always such a fun and informative session. Again, to those on the line, you'll be receiving a copy of this webinar by the end of this week. For more information about AIADA, visit AIADA.org. Thanks for joining us and have a great day, everyone.